So post-sales metrics, stories and achievements. And part of why we called it stories and achievements is sometimes what you're tracking metrics for is, sometimes what you're using metrics to do to track is to, achieve things, right? Like how many business reviews are we doing, or how many customers are using this part of our product, and do we want to improve that, or whatever, like things that you're trying to track, because what gets measured gets improved, right? That's some of the common phrase. But also there's times you use metrics to tell stories, right? And when you're telling stories, there you think about, and let's sort of dig in, you're thinking about who and when is the first line of questions that you want to ask, right? Who are you telling this story to? And when? What is the point of it? Why tell them this story now, right? So if it's a quarterly board meeting and you're a CS executive, if you're sharing something with your customer and you are 6 months out from an annual or multi-year renewal, like there's something about who and when that first sets sort of part of like why you want to gather this information, right? Then there's the why and the what, which some of the things I've already sort of led to. Why do they care? Why? What data, what metrics do you want to share with them? Which metrics are you going to share? And what is the story that you need to tell? Is it one about accomplishment? Is it one about this isn't doing well, this isn't tracking well, and why? What next steps you might do with that, suggest. How does it help you tell your story, right? Because numbers in themselves, people will glaze over when they're talking about numbers. You glaze over sometimes when you're looking at numbers, right? But when you start to think about the story that they tell and the questions that you ask, that is the point, right? And how is it going to help you express that story, sort of lead in? So even if you think about when you're talking to product, that would be the who, right? And let's say you're talking to them in a quarterly, and you try to say, hey, my customers, they're asking for this functionality, or for this new product that we should build, that sort of thing. Well, they'll say, well, who's telling you that? And you start to say, well, I was talking to Joe, and Joe's blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, but Joe, he always complains. Da, da, da. So if you have the numbers to back it up, and then you have some examples of additional people, right? That's how you get to the story. So you have your numbers that say this is a trend, this is an issue, and you can't explain it away by saying, well, that's Joe, that's Jan, that's Joanne, that's, whoever, that's Erika, all of these people who you're like, well, wait a minute. It's not just all of these people I can explain away. It's 70% of our customers too. That makes a difference, right? So is there anything you want to add to that, Erika, when you're thinking about it too, from an IC, from an individual contributor perspective?
Yes. So from an individual contributor perspective, think about the stories that you want to tell your manager and your executive leadership team about what you're doing with your book of business, right? So for me, one tool that I've used very well in the last years is every month I keep track of what I'm doing, what's happening with my book of business, if I'm upselling, if I'm upselling and expanding my customers, if I see churn happening, what the trends are. So on my one-on-ones with my manager, and every time that there's how are those called, performance review type of call, you can bring this information and tell the story of, hey, why do you think you're doing great? Why would you deserve a promotion? Or why would you deserve I don't know, like a better title or to move into a management position, for example. So if you bring numbers where you can say, hey, this is what I've been able to do. This is how I close my quarter. This is how I close the year. I can compare these numbers to the rest of the people from my team. And I can say, well, from my whole team, I was the best performer, or I was in the middle performer. Like, you can get additional information that you can use to leverage your next role. You can use this information also to tell stories on your resume, right? One of the things that's also very important that we see CSMs often not do very well is communicate their achievements and their impacts on their resumes, right? So those are stories as well. And having access to this information and knowing how to calculate these things can help you tell that story and get you whatever you're looking for, right? Whether it's another role or a promotion or more money or whatever the situation is.
Yep. And, you know, we would be remiss if we didn't mention that there are both lagging and leading metrics. And sometimes they can be both, right? Because you can have NPS and CSAT or a health score be in a lagging indicator because it's something, you know, based upon something that already happened, right? But you can also have it as a leading indicator because sometimes those are leading indicators of at-risk accounts or accounts that are doing well that might become advocates, right? And so either they, and a leading indicator then is something that's going to be an activity that leads you to a lagging indicator, which is a lagging indicator is something that is the results, something that already happened, right? And so then when you look at things like NRR or GRR or churn rate and different things, like what are those? It's really important to dig in. We're not going to go through the definition of every metric today, but they're out there and you should definitely look for them. But you want to think about when you're going to use which. So when you think about like NRR, that's net revenue retention. And that's going to not only indicate what sort of your churn rate or retention rate, right? But you're also thinking about what sort of expansion or upsell you're doing, right?
Growth.
Right. Excuse me?
Growth.
Your growth. Exactly. And so if your upsells or your cross sells and your revenue growth is in that mix, right? Now, sometimes though, if a company is doing a lot of upsell and cross sell, but they're not doing such a good job at retention, right? Then they need to unmask that issue. And by doing that, that's where you might use GRR. And GRR is only going to look at your retention. And if you're looking at your retention only, then you know, oh, wait a minute, we're not doing so good on retention, right? And if you aren't, and that impacts then things like CLT, which is customer lifetime value, or other things that you might want to take a look at. TTFV, who knows what TTFV is? Put that in the chat if you know what that one stands for. Yep, time to first value, right? And that can be critical in terms of understanding how you're doing with onboarding. Sometimes people are also they're tracking how much their onboarding costs, right? And how that's contributing to the overall cost. There are things like that you might look at. We're going to dig in a little bit, double click on the book of business that Erika has to share. But there's a number of lagging indicators you want to take a look at when you're looking at your CS program. Also, if you think of as a leader, what things you might want to look at in terms of how you're measuring your CSMs and what are you trying to prioritize and have them, what kinds of goals you give them and what types of incentives you're giving them. You might have compensation, variable compensation attached to some of those goals, or you might just make it bragging rights, right? Or something like that. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. I meant to let somebody in the office hours. Okay. So let's see. Erika, what do you else do you want to share about overview for lagging and leading indicators when it comes to individual contributors?
from the individual contributor perspective, one thing that is also important to note is that, well, while I do measure NRR, GRR, churn rate, I also look
And
into
you do
leading.
that for your own book of business, right?
Yes, yes, I do
Mhm.
that for my own book of business, just to figure out how my year is going. But I also take into consideration leading indicators, right? Such as health scores, for example, engagement, business reviews that I've had with customer, for example, NPS, CSAT, even the trends on support tickets and escalation. So I have my book of business, and then I figure out which ones are trending into a red direction, so I can spend more time on those accounts and avoid that those customers end up churning. And I can also look into usage metrics, for example. If I see that a customer is trending positively, I also try to deep dive and understand why that is, like figuring out what has made that customer successful, what can I use from that customer to replicate it with my other customers, so my other customers trend the same way. So keeping an eye at both things is really important, not only focusing on that result, but how am I going to get, what do I need to do to get there, right? So keeping track of all of those type of engagements is also critical for your success as a CSM.
And one last thing I'll mention about support ticket trends. Sometimes people think like, oh, if somebody has a bunch of support tickets, that means that, you know, they're at risk. That doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean just that they're using the product. Sometimes you still want to have the support team take a look at, are there things that we could be taking out of support tickets, make it easier for them to use it. But otherwise, it could just mean that they're actually engaged. When you look at support tickets, if they have a lot of severe tickets that have been open a long time, that could mean that it's at risk. Or if there's just zero support tickets, they may not even be using your product, right? So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Then just some examples. I want to share 2 startup SaaS metrics that CS leaders don't think about very often, and I want to encourage you to think about it because it's not your usual ones. Runway and rule of 40. Runway is your current cash divided by your burn rate, right? And your burn is your total cash expenses, and your net burn is you have starting cash minus ending cash. You divide it by a number of months in the period. Or what's helpful to understand for some of the startups that you may be working in, how many runway months do you have left, which is starting cash divided by your cash expenses, you know, and you might have that by your average cash expenses or just your overall, but you want to understand how long you're still going to be in business. And any startup these days should know what their runway months are, because you cannot go back and get more money in a raise necessarily. It's much harder to get that in a raise these days. Another thing is rule of 40. This is something that investors look at a lot, and that's your growth rate percent plus your profitability percent. And so you need to know then, as a CS leader, are you seen as being an expense, or are you adding to revenue? Or are some of your teams within CS seen as being expense, or and some seen as part of revenue? And you want to have a conversation with your CFO to understand that, or your CEO, whoever's making the decision on that. And hopefully you're part of making the case on that as well, right? But you want to understand if you're contributing to revenue, if you're seen as contributing to the revenue, right? Overall, then these percents added together, if it comes out as 40 plus, investors see that as being good. If it's seen as being less than 40, that's not so favorable, right? And that's how then investors are going to be thinking about your business and if they're going to be doing investments. We do have over in our resources a number of different things here that you can look at, including videos and that sort of thing. And I'll just, before I hand it over to Erika, I'll just share one of the resources we listed in here is a post from Miranda recently, Diezenkonski, or I don't know. I think I might have just butchered her name. Sorry. But she lists a lot of different things, including things like days sales outstanding. And if you look at days sales outstanding, that also might help you understand if you have customers coming into onboarding soon or not, right? You know, things like that. Or if you're having challenges with sales and that may be with revenue. There's a variety of different things here that she mentions as well that you might take a look at. Some may apply to you, some may not, like usage and adoption, DAU, MAU, that may not apply to your type of business. So again, always think about the types of you know, metrics that apply to you and your business, and which ones are the important ones to follow. All right, let's dig into this. And we have this in our resources. Thank you. I knew I was looking for a word like that. We have this in our list of resources as well in the slides. So be sure to check this out. Erika, why don't you walk us through this real quick?
Yeah. Can I share my screen instead? So I can move here around.
Yep. Go ahead. Poke around. And let's just try to take about 3 minutes.
I will. I
Okay.
will. And I also, hold on. I also made sure to paste here on the resources and on the section for resources here, the link to the YouTube video that has 40 minutes walkthrough of this. I'm going to run through these real quick in 3 minutes. But this is a spreadsheet that I created for my own book of business. So I see some of the questions that were asking in the chat how I built this, like did my leadership provide this information to me or not? One thing that I've seen for a lot of teams is that leadership isn't prepared to share as detailed information on how each customer is going. So I took a proactive approach instead. And what I did is I started measuring the ARR for each one of my customers at the end of every month. I was lucky enough to get information from our finance team, and I basically built this information for the 12 months. This is an example of how to do it. So what I'm tracking here is how much they're paying month to month, right? So if they're having a renewal come up and for some reason there's a downsell or there's a churn that reflects, I keep track of that. And at the end of those 12 months, I can see which customers have a positive increase on ARR, which customers have a downsell, which customers churned. And you can see here on my notes, like I keep track of everything that I'm doing with all of my accounts. So I have a detailed explanation for my manager of what's going on. But with this information, I've put here all of the formulas that Jan discussed for the lagging metrics, logo retention, gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, and how to calculate those. You can double click here and see how the formulas for each one of these metrics. And basically here you can start seeing trends, right? Is my business portfolio improving? How much of a difference in money did I make on this 12-month period, right? Taking into consideration that obviously gross revenue retention uses the starting ARR and no upsells and expansions are included. But if churn or downsells happen, will affect your metrics. And net revenue retention, as you can see here, I take into consideration the starting ARR, how much upsells and expansion I see during this time period, and how much contraction I saw from the downsells and from churn that happened during the same time period. So this is a quick walkthrough on how you would calculate your metrics. It's important that you would obviously need to get information on how which is the ARR for each one of these months. Or you can also make the same calculation comparing month 1 to month 12. So you don't have to do like every month. At least you can get the same calculations comparing month 1 to 12. And if there's any questions on how to do this, or I don't know, like you poke through and have more questions, I'm happy to answer those over LinkedIn. And
another thing, well, and also you can ask those in the community too, right? So
yeah.
But the other thing I would just mention about this is when you're looking at net revenue retention and gross revenue retention, you'll see in a lot of companies where they'll try to come up with excuses for, oh, well, this group of customers, we're not going to count them in those numbers because of this reason or that reason or whatever. I've seen a lot of excuses. Nope, that doesn't fly. That is not accurate. The way everyone counts, and the only ones count is who was at the beginning of that period. If you're going year ago, then, or quarter ago, you go with whoever was at the beginning of that quarter or the beginning of that year. And there's no exceptions to that, or else what you're doing is massaging the numbers to tell a different story, and they're not, basically you're lying. So, all right, so why don't you stop sharing now, and let's go ahead and let's see, we've got about 60 people, so I'm going to go ahead and do, I think, 12 or maybe 11 rooms. I'm going to set you up for breakouts, and let's see, we'll have 20 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes to come back when I'm going to do 10 rooms, and we'll have a few minutes to come back to share what you've learned in any sort of aha moments or new discoveries you've made, or just something you think everyone needs to know this. Please come back and share that when we come back. All right, and you've got 10 rooms, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. All right, I'm actually going to kick this off because Emma and I were just talking about health scores, and then that got me also talking about NPS. So Emma, why don't you repeat what you were saying about health scores?
So is health score really measuring customer health? Is that accurate?
Right. Well, and think about it. How often does a customer have, a green, all systems go, health score, and then they churn, right? And that's because you're not actually measuring the right things in your health score. You need to be thinking about what has impact, right? And what actually indicates if they are a successful customer versus if they're an at-risk customer, right? And so when you think about what those indicators are and how you're measuring those and put those into your health score, then you're more likely going to have a good indicator. And we were talking about some products that help with that. There are products like Foresight, or They Said, and some different things out there that actually do some in-depth or some regular pulses of asking your customers questions to really get that feedback. So something to think about. Oh, and NPS. Someone can give you a great NPS score because they would recommend it to someone else, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy using it. It may not be the right match for them, right? So sometimes it indicates that they're happy and they're getting, or they're happy, but they're not really getting the business results they need. Who knows? NPS is, would you recommend us to someone else? That's great for, your sneakers. That actually indicates something. But anyway, so what else came up in the breakout rooms? Paul, what were you about to say when you were in your breakout room?
Well, we were literally about to go there, and I feel terrible because like Lori was just starting to get into something really good about like how CSMs were rating people differently, and then the breakout session and whoop, yanked me right out. So Lori, I apologize for that, Lori.
Lori, what were you saying about that? Maybe we should all hear that.
I was talking about leading indicators, and one of the big ones is sentiment, and the way we evaluated it was on what the CSM thought. And so there initially, I think the thing that I was talking about was, one, depending on who you are and how you evaluate things, you may think that something's healthy or not, right? Each person has their own bias in terms of establishing.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of sentiment. I know people say that should be included, but you put sentiment in, and you can just recommend. Somebody had a great vacation and they're happy, and as a CSM, I want to be sure that they know that my customer's happy. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and so that was the other thing is there's a difference between do I get along with my, or does my CSM, let's say I'm the CSM, do I get along with my day-to-day contact and assess that relationship
Yeah.
versus how the customer feels about the software. And so
Yeah.
the way I used it was just as like, I would look at what we created on the health score without it and with it and see how much
Trended.
how
Yeah.
far it was. If it was completely off, I, said
Just took
something.
it out. Yeah.
But I was going to actually ask, of these leading indicators, I mean, I have a handful that I know I've tracked. I'm wondering what other people track. So you have all these metrics that we talk about, but those like Jan said, is they're lagging indicators. But something like we did support tickets or engagement as it pertains to webinars. Like, do you participate in things that the company puts out, like training? I would love to know what other people have found useful.
And it's probably product related to some degree too, right? Because when you think about for some products in some customer bases, if they're not using a particular report, then they're not getting, then you know that something's wrong, right? Like they should be using that report every day or there's a problem, right? And so that, or weekly or monthly or something. So that's something that you should take a look at your product and your customer base. Is there anything that folks wanted to share in terms of what's working in terms of the metrics that you've been tracking, either in the past or currently?
So just also, let me add on to this because I'm looking at what people are saying. So there's a difference between a product that has to be used and a product that is more optional.
Right.
And so usage is very different for, say, a payroll technology or compliance technology. They have to use it.
Exactly. And so usage doesn't matter in that case because like point of sale technology, they're going to use it up until the moment that they don't.
Exactly.
So if usage doesn't indicate anything, don't put that in your health score, right? Sarah, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. I'm on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where one of our usage metrics can not only be an indicator of their usage of the product, but the success of their team. So we work with SDRs and BDRs, and we can see how many meetings are being booked in a week. So if we understand what their quotas look like, and they're not meeting them, they're not only at risk of churning as a customer, they're at risk of being laid off, which is obviously going to result in churn. So that is a very, very heavy hitting risk indicator for us based on product usage.
Right. And so that's the kind of thing that if you bring that up to your customer who is managing that team, then that can also help alert them. They might need to do some layoffs, but by doing those layoffs, then it might also save the company the expense of that team. And maybe then they'll need your product a little longer or something like that. You never know. Yeah.
Having the heart that I have, my hope is to prevent the layoffs in this job market.
Of course.
So we try to get ahead of that.
Of course. And then, but there's some people, SDR, that's a tough job. You're doing a lot of cold calls. There's some people that's not the right match for. So yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Paul, what were you going to, or did you, was there
no, I was just gonna, just follow on to what Sarah was saying. Sarah, you're spot on. Our research has showed that the employee experience leads directly to customer experience, and a good customer experience leads to the brand experience, which leads to net profit. And so we've found that like an effective score includes a measurement of all three of those things. The employee experience or team experience that's doing the measurement is a major indicator. I think in our breakout, it was Lori, when I got cut off, she was starting to say how like some of the CSMs, they would measure the customer's health with their own gut feel, right? Which maybe they're having a good day, right? To your point earlier, Jan, sentiment is very subjective. But we've also found sentiment can be very, very useful when in the right context and measured alongside engagement, consideration, and loyalty as part of the customer experience and the experience they have with the brand and the experience that your own team is having with your own company. So all of those things holistically make up a really strong health score.
A health score for who though? For the customer or for the company?
For the target customer. So you've got to take into account
so
the
you're
general
talking
population.
about okay. So that's a very comprehensive measurement of sentiment across them all, which you may or may not have access to depending upon your product.
Well,
yeah,
we found a way to do it. So call me if you need help.
So Paul, we'll have to discuss more of that. All right, Eric, what were you going to share?
One of the other things that came up kind of adjacent to this in our conversation was CSMs having access to this information. So I think one area, it's getting access is one thing of just being able to find and retrieve the data, but also doing so in a way that's meaningful and not sending you down a rabbit hole to go figure out that information. And so the operational support is kind of one avenue that's really kind of imperative for this to be successful for CSMs, particularly on the type of business you're managing. If you're managing an enterprise team and you've got a handful of customers, it's easy to dive in for maybe per customer on what's going on with support tickets and billing and any pro serve they have going on. But if you're managing an SMB book of business or a long tail of customers, that's just not going to happen. And so operational support to have that. And then the other kind of thing that came along with that is there is this like multi-spoked wheel of what goes on in a customer's ecosystem as they relate to your company, and getting leadership's clear direction on what's important prior to those lagging indicators, beside retention and expansion, what is it that we should be focusing on and why, and having the whole team in that same understanding is another important thing. And so kind of that operational structure to support, as well as the leadership buy-in and clarity around where to go with that information.
All right, CS leaders, are you listening to this? This is how you can help your CSMs and your overall book of business, not just their single book of business, right? Kimberly, what were you going to share?
Yeah, sorry, I guess I was slightly taken in a different direction, but in my group, there was a lot of talk about, how to actually come up with data if maybe you're a less mature organization and, you just feel like you don't have numbers, and so JP, and also as actual, I see how to feel more, I guess, empowered with this if math or data analysis isn't, your strongest area, which isn't me, by the way. I'm just speaking for the group. I actually love that kind of stuff. But so a couple of things that came out was JP, who actually I think had to jump already. He was just saying, you could really keep it simple. At the very least, how many customers you have and how many you started with, and so if you're, tracking that, you can at least get some data on like your logo retention and then try to kind of like gradually build from there. Hopefully getting more operational support, like what Eric was getting at. But basically it was kind of like, don't just throw your hands up in the air and say you don't have any data. Like really think about what you already do have. And also I threw out there that there's a lot on LinkedIn Learning nowadays with advanced Excel, intermediate Excel, and so some of this stuff, once the actual equations with Erika and others have illustrated so nicely, if you just get more information about how to plug those into Excel or other software programs, you can get some of the information you want.
It's really true. Excel skills are helpful if you're kind of doing a DIY. And one more comment, and then let's call it a night. We've been going a few minutes over, and appreciate that everyone's sticking around for this hot topic. All right, Vikram.
Hi, everyone. And it's my first meeting, so thank you so much for having
great.
me. Yeah,
welcome.
Hi. Glad to meet everyone. So, and just quick background, in our, we're a Series C startup. It's a field force automation platform, as complex as it gets. So one of the fundamental ways, while as a leader, we are responsible for financial metrics, one of the frameworks we've instituted with the customer success managers is to actually, and I think I see many of the comments, in our SOWs and anything, what have we committed to the customers, and keep demonstrating whether we've achieved those metrics by persona, right?
Sure.
And
especially if those are things that they want to, that are important to them for their business outcomes. Absolutely.
Correct. Yep. And that's one thing. Second finding I've realized is customers don't know what they don't know. So if you're able to use product or solution metrics to show them the value and correlate it back to why they bought, They spent 200K on a, I was telling the breakout group before, they spent 200K on a product, on a solution. Why was it worth both financially as well as how did it make lives easier? Demonstrate that value on a continuous basis. And on my humble opinion, the ARR, NDR, the financial metrics will speak for themselves. Many times, I think we've looked at financial metrics and trying to find out issues, whereas not looking at, I would say, why the customer is buying, right? So if you focus there, automatically most of the problems get solved. So that's how we've tried to grow our business by empowering the CSMs to be in a position to tell what value they're getting the customer on a monthly basis and on an ongoing basis. And
that's a great point. Yeah, value metrics. What sort of value are you delivering to your customer, and are you communicating that and sharing that and updating it and making certain that it's something that resonates with them? That's a great way to close it out, Vikram, because that was something that we hadn't quite mentioned from that particular perspective there. And I did forget to mention, we are going to start doing collaboration groups. Sean is here. We'll be sure to mention that over in our general chat as well. Sean Porkar is helping us to start that. So if you want to continue this conversation in groups, that's what collaboration groups are for. We're going to set them up for CS leaders and CSMs. And Sean, I know you want to say something about it, but we're sort of 10 minutes over. Really quick, do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. We can talk more about this next week, but briefly, we're starting with collaboration groups for folks that are seeking their next role. There's so many of you, and we want to be supportive as possible. Secondarily, depending on how much interest there is, we have the space and the format to set up groups for what we're calling operators, whether you're a CS leader or CSM, whether you're focused on different segments, getting you together in groups where a volunteer can step up and help lead that group. And then you can schedule, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or even quarterly conversations, depending on the group's availability. So look out in Slack for more info. I've got a guide and a spreadsheet to try to help us organize this. Again, we're all volunteers, and we're trying to make sure this is something that's going to be helpful and beneficial for the community. So thanks for the shout, Jan.
Love that. Love that. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. We are at an earlier time next week, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm not sure what that is in the rest of the world, but everyone is welcome. And we will see you next week. And looking forward to seeing you in the community. All right. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate all of your input tonight. Thanks for your contributions.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Yes, guys. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.